For those of you that don't know me, my name's Richard Bates from EBS, and obviously today's webinar is with Sicon, and we're going to be showing barcoding and warehousing module for Sage 200. We're going to record the session today as well, so if you do want to share it with any colleagues, then obviously we'll share that link out to you and you can pass that on. We'll be taking some questions and answers towards the end of the session, but you know, if you do think of anything as we're going through, feel free to pop it into the chat and we'll pick up on those as and when. I can't see anybody else joining at the moment, so I guess sort of just before I pass over to Sicon, those of you that again don't know myself, don't know electronic business systems, you know, we've been working, EBS has been established for 40 years. We've been working with Sage certainly for the last 15-20 years of that, and we've got, I don't even want to think about the relationship with Sicon, but we've certainly been linked and working very closely with Sicon over the last 5 to 10 years. So do offer some excellent products, and I guess without any sort of further ado, I'll pass over to Ben at Sicon to just do a bit of an introduction before handing over to Steve, who's going to do the demo.
Brilliant, thank you, Richard. So yeah, thanks all for joining. You probably can't see me. The guys are laughing just beforehand saying I hadn't done my hair. No, again, thanks for joining the session. So my name is Ben Nichols. I'm the business partner account manager here at Sicon. We also have our sales manager, Steve Gemmer, who will actually be presenting the session today. And Richard, I think, probably gave a great introduction, but those of you who haven't heard of Sicon, we've actually been developing applications for Sage 200 for over 20 years. And we actually have a fully integrated solutions from managing your cash flow to providing better customer experiences with CRM. But today we are going to specifically focus on the barcoding and warehousing. And based on the conversations that we've had with the customers and partners, we wanted to spend the next hour or so on 5 key benefits that will allow you to spend more time working on the things that help you to actually scale your business. And as you've seen probably from the email from Darren, those things are, you know, better control of your stock, improving your service to customers, reducing your costs, better space utilization, and I think probably one of the most important and one of the conversations we're having a lot, which is reducing your stock taking pain, which personally I know can be an absolute nightmare. So I'm going to pass over to Steve, and he's going to walk you through the modules. And if you do have any questions, feel free to leave a little comment. It's on the top right-hand corner, and we'll get through them as quickly as we can.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ben. So hopefully everybody can see my screen and the Sicon website. If you can, that means we're off to a good start, which always helps. So in terms of Sicon, as Ben said, feel free to visit the Sicon website. There's a lot of rich information. Now, the reason I'm starting is just to highlight, in terms of the barcoding, some of the resources that you can go to, but actually then talk about what ours is and what it's not before we get into the fun stuff, which is the showing of the solution and how that works. So if you click down on barcoding and warehousing, there are some links to videos. So there's a mutual client of ours, Agriline, who are heavy users of this. So there's a nice sort of reference video there. Help and user guides, there's screenshots and descriptions of everything that we're going to go through today. So that's customer facing. You don't have to register or anything. But where I want to start is just by clicking on this orange flipbook, and I'm going to go through to pages 10 and 11. So from a barcoding and warehousing perspective, we've taken up what I would say is probably a slightly different approach to it than other solutions that are available. So rather than having a separate database, we actually use Sage's database. So your existing stock, purchase order processing, sales order processing. So the main benefit is the rollout of it is quicker because we haven't got to replicate the stock, but we're also then utilizing standard Sage processes. So are the stock items batch or serial traceable? So how we achieve that is there's an element of our software that's installed in your Sage 200 solution. So you do need a current supported version of Sage. We've also got a web API connector. So just think of it as a web connector that you can secure, which connects Sage itself then to an Android app on a device like the one I'm just holding up here, and that you can see on the screen. And then all you need is a user or users to be able to log into that app, and then a wireless network to cover your warehouse. So the device I'm using today is this one. It's from a company called JM Prime. Now, we don't get involved in the hardware. We've obviously got recommendations, but we didn't want you to be tied to specific wireless networks or Sicon hardware. So keep it as simple as possible. So this device I'm using, as I say, it looks a bit more like a mobile phone today, but you can get a hand grip on there, so it becomes a trigger grip. It's running Android 9. It's a 2D and a 1D scanner. So what that means is it will read the square QR codes as well as your traditional barcodes, similar to what I've got on my sheet here. That was my older device, the one just up here. Again, similar spec. There's a 1D. We've got some clients using just a Samsung Android tablet and a separate Bluetooth scanner. So just to give you an idea of the hardware. So where it all starts is actually in Sage, as we mentioned. So just to begin with, we're going to start in stock, and then we'll run through the various different features. And of course, we'll then be linking that back to I suppose, the benefits that Ben spoke about earlier. So if I just filter one of my stock items here and we look at the stock item details, with this installed, what's great actually is any outstanding purchase orders that are on there will appear immediately. So again, it does speed up that implementation. But the key areas that we're going to utilize, firstly, Sage's Barcode Field. Now, depends on the type of sector that you're in. If you're selling items that are going to go to retail outlets who are going to in turn use those barcodes, then you may or may not already be registered for GS1. If you aren't, then you put your unique GS1 barcode in. If it's just something you're going to barcode internally for being able to move the items around, you can either make up some barcodes, or we've actually got clients where the barcodes that you can print, and you can print labels, are produced based on just your stock item code. So there's plenty of flexibility. We can also store barcodes from your suppliers. So if you've got supplier specific barcodes, we can scan those and the system will recognize that's from that particular supplier. And then from a location perspective, against each of your warehouses, utilizing Sage's bin locations. And we've actually tweaked this ever so slightly. So you can, Sage has got 9 bin definitions, as you can see here. And typically at the moment, if you're not really using them, it will, as it allocate to 1, 2, 3. Well, we've hijacked that. We would use bin definition 2 for your pick face, your low hanging fruit, 3 for overflow, and 9 for bulk. And then we use some of the others, as you can see on the screen. So it does enable you to then, as for sales orders, typically as you allocate to a sales order, it's then going to allocate hopefully to the pick face bins first before going around to bulk, etc. We've also tweaked it even further where you can drill down and set minimum and maximums and reorders on the bins. So this is to generate replenishment suggestions. So what you need to replenish those pick phases. Again, there's a lot more to it. I'm just going to whip through some of the basics. So that's some of the areas that you'll need to consider in terms of your stock items. The next part then is the barcoding and warehousing element in Sage that we've added. And the first bit then would be your locations. So for some customers, they've already got racking, they've already got the bin locations set up, and it might be just a case of printing labels so we can scan those barcodes and then sequencing them in the most optimal route. We've got other clients who onboard this where they want to then start to label up the warehouse, whether that's just in sections A, B, and C, or actually racking it. And what you can do is you can import those bins, but you can sequence them. So what you're going to have is, if I'm trying to pick a sales order, it's not going to send me to aisle A first, then all the way down to the other end of the warehouse, then I'm back to the middle. A, I wouldn't want to do that. I don't think I'm fit enough, but B, it's not the most optimal thing, you know, for your warehouse, and really again ties into kind of speeding up those processes. So you can sequence those bins, as I say, into that optimal route. The final little bit of setup that I'm going to cover off today is in the settings. So you get your brand new device, simply scan that QR code or enter that URL. It will take you through to the App Center where you can download the app. Once you've got the app downloaded, the first screen you'll see on your device will be similar to this. You click on server, either scan the QR code or enter these details. And that's the QR code, and you can print that off. And that's your device now linked to this Sage company. All you then need is a user license. So these are named users. I'm logging in today as a user called Steve, and we can control what features and functions I've got access to. So for example, you probably wouldn't want me to add or write stock off. So simply just turn those options off and they won't appear on the handheld. Should I prove myself, then simply ticking them, saving and saving. Next time I refresh or log into the application, those options are going to be there. So it's great for when you're onboarding new users. So those are kind of the standard Sage features. We've then got some extensions. The top three there are only relevant if you've got some of the other Sicon add-ons. But we've got options where moving stock between warehouse locations, replenishment, as I mentioned, and that, but I'll talk a bit about some of those shortly. Some specific user options. This one I'll always point out. I'm not allowed to over receive a purchase order in my demonstration today. So the system won't allow me to do so. So if there were 12 instead of 10, I'd leave that line alone, and then Ben, who's my supervisor, would have permission, could then receive that in and do a check, even down to how many do you want me to scan before I can start typing on the screen. Final couple of bits would be the warehouses. So you do need to log into the specific warehouse. So that avoids mispicks, but it means that I'm just transacting with purchase orders, sales orders, for example, within that warehouse. But you can choose which ones I've got access to. So perhaps I float across multiple sites or virtual warehouses, you could give me more, or if I'm only ever going to work in this particular warehouse, keep things simple, and that's the only one I'm going to log into. And then finally, from a printer perspective, using standard Sage report layouts, we've got a number of label designs which can be tweaked. The design for Zebra printers, although as I said, you could use other hardware should you wish. So for the user, what label printer or dispatch note printer do you want my items to go to? So again, if you've got a large pack bench, I'm not going to the opposite end to where I normally work. Okay, so that's just a bit about the setting. There's a load of other settings, don't worry, I'll talk about some of those, but I'm not going to go through that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start really at the top, and we're going to run from receiving a purchase order. We're going to put that stock away. We're going to move some stock around the warehouse. We're going to look at stock take, and then we'll pick and dispatch a sales order, as well as some of the other features as well. Obviously today's fairly high level. Some of it may well be relevant to the way you work, but certainly off the back of this, if you like what you see, would definitely recommend getting in touch with Darren and Richard at EBS to arrange a one-to-one demonstration. So we'll start with purchase order processing. Now, there it is halfway down. I've got every single one of the Sicon add-ons installed, which is why my menu's busier than normal. But what we'll do is we'll put on a random order. So we'll go for Christy and Cullen. They'll do today. And I want my stock to come in tomorrow. So standard Sage purchase order. Nothing too different here at all. So I'm going to put on some of the stock items that I've got. So my espresso machine, and we'll buy 10 of those in today. I'll put some cups on there. Apologies, this is what demo data I've got, although hopefully everybody likes coffee. So we'll buy some cups in, and we'll buy in a dishwasher. Buy that into this warehouse. Now, the reason I've picked a dishwasher is the dishwasher is my serial traceable stock item. Now, again, if you've got Sage set up for certain stock items that are batch or serial traceable, as you'll know in Sage, you have to enter the batch or serial as you receive them in. What you're going to see on the handheld is we're simply mirroring the standard Sage process, but enabling the warehouse to do it real time. So your stock levels are as live as they update. So let's just save this. There's my purchase order number. I'm just going to make a note of that. 3814 is the one I'm looking for. So let's close that. Let's just refresh the list, and we can see there it is there. So let's go to the handheld. Now, I'm in the office today with my device connected to our guest Wi-Fi, and that's connected to a server. I don't know where this Sage is held, but it's connected across the internet to that server. So I'm going to pick up the device, and I'm not tied to a specific device. So long as that's connected to the company that I work with, then as I log in, it's now checking. So it's connecting to the API. It's checked. It's happy that I exist. It's the correct username and password. It's now asking me which warehouse am I working in today. So I'm going to work in the main warehouse. And these are the options available. So if I start at the top, I'm going to receive a purchase order. Without me synchronizing, I haven't got to dock the handheld or anything. As I type in just 38, it's filtering the list. I could have typed in Christian, or if there's a barcode on the delivery note, which is your PO number, I could have scanned that. And as I select the PO, there's the items on the order. And what you can see is your stock item code. If you've got a supplier code against that particular stock item against the supplier, then you're going to see their code. We can also see the description of the stock item as well and the requested date. Now at this stage, we've actually got 3 clients who use this where there's no barcodes on the items that they receive in. They're receiving sheets of steel, fence posts, etc. So they'll just tap on the screen, just click the plus or enter the quantity, and then they can print labels. But if there are barcodes on them, you can scan the barcodes as they come in. Now, if I scan an item that's not on the PO, that's just telling me it recognizes the stock item, but it's not on the PO. If I scanned a barcode it didn't recognize, then it would ask me which item does that relate to, and then it will store that against the supplier for next time so it recognizes it. So again, there's some clever UI in there as well. I can keep clicking on the plus, but you'll notice, as I said earlier, I'm not allowed to ever receive, so it won't let me. And actually, if I try to scan an extra one, I get a message telling me this cannot be ever received. Alternatively, if I click here in the center, I can just enter the quantity and away we go. And that's where that setting earlier, how many do you want to force me to scan before I can enter quantities, makes sense. Is it the correct item? Yes, it is, but you don't want me scanning 50 times because that's just a waste of everyone's time. So being able to enter the quantity, so there are settings to be able to help with that. The only difference now is with the dishwasher, is as I select that, I've got to enter a serial number. Now, I could scan a barcode. I don't have one available that I can see. Have I got one on this box here? Oh, yes, I do. There we go. So I'm just going to scan this unique barcode here for a moment on the system, and the system's quite happy. Now that's stored. Now at this stage, if I want to print a label, I can swipe these across, go to here, click on print labels, and I've got an option to print a single label or one for each of the items as well. If I click on print, that's then going to spit the appropriate label based on obviously the structure of what labels for traceable or non-traceable items are set up out to my label printer. Alternatively, I've got this option here, which is I could take a photograph if I wanted to. Now, you would need Sicon documents for it to be able to store then against the goods received, but it's great for taking photos of the items or even the delivery note. If that's not relevant, then just simply turn that option off. You wouldn't need to purchase documents as well. If I click on the icon, I can then confirm receipt. Now I'm going to use this middle option today, and I'm going to receive that into our goods in bin, ready for somebody to put it away. But there is an option, this one, which you can turn on, where if all of the items you're receiving on that PO are going to go into the same bin location, I can just tell the system I'm going to put them straight away there before I put them away. So there are, again, settings for different ways that people will work. I have to enter a GRN number. So just as the same in Sage, you'll be entering a delivery note number. Click on submit. Would I like to receive? And as I say, yes, and I'm going to do this as quick as I can. If I view my PO, that's now updated and that's our order received. So really the first real benefit, as I always see this, is it's as live as people are updating. It's nice and simple for them. You haven't got bits of paper. So it's great, especially if you're faster moving, as the items are in, that's now in stock. And if I drill down and look at the dishwasher, and we come down to our deliveries, we can see it's been received by Steve, the delivery date and the GRN number. And because it was a serial traceable item, you can see which serial number that I received as well for that single item. So that's kind of the fundamental basics internally. Now, the next step is to put that stock away. But before I do this, if we come in back into our stock control and look at the list, what we can see is there's my espresso machine. And if I look at the history, we can see there were 10 on that PO. We've received them in, and they're currently sat in a goods in bin. Now, it's entirely up to you. That's one we've set up. It could be unspecified. You could call it whatever you want to. And by the way, if you don't use bins, you don't have to. I mean, technically, you've already got a bin set up. If you look at your Sage system, it will be something probably called unspecified. But again, you can carry on working that way should you wish. The obvious benefit, though, of setting up locations is if you've got a new starter, is the system giving them at least a bit of guidance as to where to find those stock items. So the next stage then I'm going to do is to put that away. So if I go into put away stock, I've got a list of all of those stock items in that put away bin. And if I scan my espresso machine, it will show us the bin locations where we've stored that stock before. Now, one question that often comes up is, I don't want to put the stock in those. I want to put it over here. Can I? Well, so long as that bin exists in Sage, absolutely. So if I scan BA01, it will pop up and say, well, that location doesn't exist against that stock item, but would you like to create it? And if I say yes, I can now put that stock. So again, it's giving flexibility for the warehouse to be able to manage what they do best, but also it's keeping your Sage system up to date. Now, of course, they've got to physically put the stock in that bin. There's nothing we can do to force them with that. But again, it's giving them the tools to be able to handle that. I can also see a maximum as well. So again, if you remember, you could set the maximum up on the bins. Now you can, in Sage, you can mix and match, have multiple stock items in a single bin. But for those customers where it's one bin per product, it's a great way of being able to say, actually, have we got any space? I can see we've already got 50 in DA01. We can fit 100. Well, actually, yeah, I can fit another 10 in there. So again, different use for different people. But all I do is I go, how many am I going to move? All 10 of those. I'll move them to bin CA01, transfer the stock, and that's moved. And if we have a look back at Sage again, and we look at our history, we can now see that 10 were moved from goods in by a user called Steve, and they're now in CA01. So again, as Sage allocates the stock, it's now going to allocate based on what stock's in the actual bins. The only difference with serial traceable is if I scan my dishwasher and I tell it where I'm going to put it, so I'd scan my bin, is I need to select a serial number. So how many am I going to move? So we'll move one of those. Now, because sometimes I have to make up serial numbers and I can't remember them, there is an option where I can just hit the sliders, which is great as well if you've got multiple. But actually, if I've got a barcode with a serial number, or I've printed a label with a barcode of the serial number, I can scan the item, scan the barcode. And for those of you who have items that come in that are coded using GS1128 or complex barcodes, for those who don't know what that is, essentially there's numbers inside a bracket. So it's a single barcode which tells the system what the stock item code is. And it could be what the batch or serial number is and a use by date, for example. So there's specific industry standard codes. We do work with complex barcodes. So again, you can scan a single code and it would then fill in the relevant areas. But in this instance, I'm now going to move that particular item, and that's now in bin AA01. So that's great. That's the first few bits. Now, one of the challenges in Sage, and again, you may or may not come across this that we hear, is it's great. You bring stock in on a sales order, you allocate, but the warehouse wants to move that stock. And in Sage, you can't do that. If it's allocated, you have to unallocate, move the stock, and then reallocate. So it can be a bit of a laborious process. We've got around that. So if I come down to this item here to go to a single item transfer, what I can do is follow the instructions. So I go to the bin, scan the bin, tells me what stock items are in there. So I'm going to scan my dishwasher that I just moved. In fact, sorry, ignore that. What I'm going to look for is, I haven't got any free stock in there. So let's go to bin BA01. Perfect. So can you see my kettle here at the moment? And what that's telling me is that's allocated to a sales order. Up here, it's saying we've got a SOP allocation and free stock. That's allocated to another one of our modules. In these 95 meat slices, we've got some are allocated to a sales order. And if I select it and the items, I can move those. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to move my kettle. I'm going to select one of the kettles and I'm going to select the bin I want to move it to. So we'll go to bin AA01. And if I transfer that stock, if we actually have a look in here and we look at the kettle, what you can see is, so that's another one of our pop-ups, another add-on. We can see here there was an allocation to that sales order 5276. Steve's moved one of those from bin BA01 to AA01, and then we've moved the allocation with it. So it means the warehouse again can be moving stock around. Where there is allocated stock, it's then going to move that allocation within that warehouse. If you want to move multiple items of stock, then we've got tools to be able to do so as well. Perfect. And you do that just by the multi-item transfer, and that's where you're picking multiple items and moving them to a single bin. Now, moving between warehouses, now there's probably there's probably more scenarios, but typically it's if you're multiple site and you're moving from one site to another, then you're going to be loading a van or a lorry or something to move that stock. Or you might be moving stock within, which are virtual warehouses, so perhaps from raw materials to a production area. So there's two different kind of warehouse transfers. They're essentially the same, but we've got a couple of options for those. So if I take scenario number one, which is I want to move some stock from warehouse A to warehouse B, but they're within the same physical location, I do have to have access to both warehouses to be able to do so. But if I click on warehouse transfer and I click on the plus, again, just follow the instructions. Bin AA01, I can only move free stock. You can't move allocated because, again, Sage won't allow that. So I'm going to move some toasters, so I can scan. So a couple of toasters, and I can pick those, and I could go around and pick multiple items from different bins, and I build up, essentially, I'll build up a transfer list. That creates a unique number, which is 86. I can then pick where I want to transfer that to. So in this case, to my factory, I could choose where I wanted to move that for each individual item, or if I click on that, transfer all the stock, I'm going to put it into a single bin, and I'll put it into BA01. And now I've moved stock in Sage from warehouse, the toasters, they're now in the factory warehouse, and they're across the way. Again, far simpler than writing on a piece of paper and then waiting for somebody to update it. If I'm physically moving it though from one site to another, actually what you want is a bit of a pick list and perhaps a dispatch note as well. Inside of the Sicon Barcoding and Warehousing, we have options in here to do a stock transfer. The way that works is you would, I might already have one on there. Yep, so you create a transfer. Where are you moving it from? Warehouse to factory. What stock items? You do have to allocate the items just as you would in Sage. And essentially what happens is that then appears on the handheld. Tells me where we're transferring, when we're going to be doing so, tells me the items to pick and where I'm going to pick them from. I can then do a pack and I can do a dispatch. And then when they get the other end, they can receive that transfer in and put the stock away. So it's a nice way of being able to control that, especially if they're, where they're separate physical locations. I will talk a bit more about the pick, pack and dispatch when we get to the sales orders. A couple of other features then. You can do an internal issue, internal return, just mirrors standard Sage. You've got your internal areas, whatever you've got set up in Sage would appear. So this is great. Perhaps if you're you want to keep your stock levels correct, you might be taking some stock for an exhibition. Although I appreciate we can't do that at the moment, but hopefully in the not too distant future, if you're doing an exhibition, you want to take some stock items, have an internal area called exhibitions with your nominals, and then you could return some of that stock. Add stock, write stock off. Again, pretty self-explanatory, but you wouldn't give that to everybody. But for me, the one that, especially around add stock, is this stock inquiry. So you find an item on the floor, or it's sat just by the back door, and you're thinking, well, is that just something that's it's an extra item somebody's left there? Is it a freebie? What is it? Well, if you go into the stock inquiry, you can scan that stock item, tell you a bit of information, but it will also tell you where in the warehouse that stock resides. So go around and check, is it in one of the bins? So that's kind of example number one. The second example though is we find a bin and perhaps there's only one item left. So you scan it, have we got any stock available in bulk? If we have, brilliant, we can then obviously use the transfer to move some stock inside that warehouse. Or there isn't any other stock in the system. So if I keep swiping, have we got any purchase orders for that stock item on the system and when are they coming in? Yes, we have. Brilliant. I don't need to do anything. Or no, we haven't got any on order. We haven't got any stock, in which case I need to let my supervisor know to update the office. I could do a very quick bin check. So just a bit of a sense check of people doing things right without a formal stock take. So scan a bin and away you go. But also you've got the traceable item. So if you are using batch or serial traceability, scan the serial number on that particular item, and it will tell you where in the warehouse that stock item exists in Sage's world. So you could go and put it back into the correct location. Ben mentioned stock take. So again, yeah, that tends to be for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, it's like anything. I think it's probably an onerous task. It's very easy to put it back because of the very nature of what it is. And we've got a client who they would shut down for a week to a week and a half every year to do their stock take. All of their stock sat in just an unspecified bin in Sage. So it was just wherever they had space. So they used Sage's stock take. So they would come into stock control, not stock maintenance, adjustments, manage the stock take. So let me just delete the previous one. And what they would do is they would create a new stock take. So standard Sage stock take here for the warehouse. They count bins, which would just be the one, but that's what I'm going to do is count bins. I'm going to call this EBS. I'll display that, and they would just count the unspecified. What they actually do now is they do cyclical, so they count a number of bins each week. So they will select those bins, and what releases it to the handheld is to save and print. So what you'd be doing at the moment is you print off Sage's form, put it on clipboards, and people will go around, write the items on, and then somebody's having to manually key those items in. So the first benefit here straight off, and what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and set this up so I can do this as quickly as possible for you, is there's no bits of paper. So the moment you create the stock take, you have to count it there and then, just as you do with Sage. Anybody who's logged into a handheld who has access to that warehouse that we've just created it and has access to that functionality, it will appear. I would then say I'm going to count AA01, and it shows me the stock items it's expecting, and I can enter some quantities. But the key one is if I scan my dishwasher and I scan my serial number and I click on confirm. Now I'm going to say I'm going to try and do this as quickly as possible. The first major benefit, hopefully you can see, is the moment I confirm that count, those figures are inside of the stock take. So no more manually typing those figures in. Click on the variance and you can see, is it a good count? No, that's a pretty terrible count. So if that is, you can then ask somebody to go back and they can recount a bin. So that's the first one. So that's great, huge time saving. So for these guys, they now, I don't know the exact time, say 8 o'clock in the morning, they create the stock take, comes down to the handhelds, and by sort of 8:30, 20 to 9, stock take's done and they're ready to go. But we can take it one step further. So if I find my dishwasher, wherever that is, that's the one there, you'll notice this icon here. So for those of you who utilize batch or serial traceability will know that it's a bit of a nightmare because you've then got to do the batch or serial adjustments elsewhere. We've tweaked this, and what it will show you is the serial numbers, in this case it was expecting, and the ones that it's found. If it finds an unexpected serial number over here, but it means that we can record the serial numbers, and as we do our additions and write-offs with the Sage stock take, it's then doing including those in that update as well. So again, a huge time saving. So that's option number one. Starts in Sage, out to the handheld, finishes in Sage. Option number two, though, is we've created something called a dynamic stock take. The rules are still the same. You have to count it there and then. There is no point in time count. We did look at it, but it gets very, very complicated then to try and track all the movements. So the dynamic stock take can start in Sage, but typically it'll start on the handheld. Could be the supervisor clicks on the plus and says, what are we going to count, stock items or bins, and create a dynamic stock take, and then says, okay, Steve, can you go and count this one? So I go into that bin. Now, mine's set up at the moment as a blind count. You can put the expected quantities on there. My personal take on it is I am not lazy or disingenuous, but I can absolutely guarantee you if you told me there were 50,000 screws in that bin and asked me to count them, I'm going to come back with 49,980. It's just human nature. Probably come back with a Starbucks coffee as well. But basically you enter the quantities, add found items and confirm it. That then comes back into Sage then. we're into the dynamic stock take, where you can view the results, showing you the discrepancies, and if you're happy, you can complete it, and obviously the process that then happens thereafter. So a couple of options for the stock take, but again, it's far quicker than using a paper-based system. So the final bit is pick and dispatch sales orders. Now there's a lot more that I could cover off, which is around how do we handle pallets, etc. So there are bits on there, but as I say, just kind of coming over the basics. But let's look at sales orders. So regardless of how your sales order comes into the system, whether you're putting it on, whether you've got a link where it's dropping in perhaps from your warehouse, we are picking and dispatching from standard Sage sales orders. That said, with a slight little tweak. So I'm going to pick King Stanton today. Ignore this pop-up and the next one. That's another Sicon add-on from distribution. So we'll say the customer wants it today just for simplicity. I'm actually going to come down across here, sorry, to the delivery and invoicing, and I'm going to change the order priority and say it's an A, and I'm going to pick that from my analysis codes, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I'm going to add an item in, and we'll get rid of that dishwasher. So we'll get rid of one of those, and we'll get rid of some of those cups and the espressos. So we'll get rid of 10 of those, and we'll get rid of, let's do that one as well. Get rid of some cups, so I'll get rid of 150 cups, make a 50% profit on those. Again, ignore some of the pop-ups, it's because I've got other add-ons on, but standard Sage sales order. Now, at this stage, you've got a couple of options. It really depends on the type of business you are. The first type, if you're similar to Amazon, so Amazon, there might be 20 parcels go out. They don't care whether it goes in one parcel or 20. If you've got stock, get it out the door. And if you're not bothered about how many dispatches, then leave this setting up here off, which I'll explain what that is in a moment, and any allocated stock will just appear on the handheld for you to pick, pack and dispatch. If, however, you want to control whether you dispatch part allocated orders, you turn on this ready to pick flag, and essentially until that's ticked, that order will not appear on the handheld. So it's a way of controlling it. You can also configure the system to assign to specific users to pick specific orders as well, should you wish. Now, I've actually got a subsetting of this ready to pick enabled where I can, if the whole order is fully allocated, it's going to automatically tick that for me when I save it. There's also another subsetting where by printing the pick list, which a lot of customers do, that's the trigger to say all of those orders, whether they're fully allocated or part allocated, those are the ones we want to go out the door today. And what you can do on the pick list is you can actually put a barcode at the top. It's a standard Sage feature within the report layout, which decodes to be the sales order. And it means I can pick that order up and scan that barcode. So I'm just going to save this. And I'm going to make a note of my sales order, 5490. And there's my sales order. So if I refresh, we can see there's the order fully allocated. Now, we also, inside of the barcoding and warehousing bit, have a slight tweak to the sales order list. So Sage is standard sales order list, but we do then add in this option here where you can see whether the ready to pick flags ticked or not. So on the handheld, now it's interesting, you can go paperless with this because I can click on dispatch sales orders and I can find the sales order that I'm looking for, which is the one at the bottom there. But it's surprising, and Agriline do this, they will send the pick list down to the printer in the warehouse. And the reason for that, and I spoke with their operations director who said they know if the printer's empty or the bits of paper are in the in tray, kind of and the orders to go out today are empty, kind of finished, they know that they're done for the day. So it's just a way of being able to reconcile it as well. So you know it's an interesting one. You could go paperless, but we're still seeing people print a bit of paper anyway. The other thing is, if I click on this icon just here in the corner, do you remember I set the order priority and I filled in one of the analysis codes? it's a great way of being able to say, okay, I want you to go and pick all the priority A's and the source where it's eBay, and then it's going to filter based on those criteria. So I select my sales order. It's going to, you can turn off the info tab if you wish, but it's going to load that. And as I say, this is doing it all over the internet as well, so it's live. Shows me the delivery address, the contact details. As I swipe along, it's then showing me what do I need to pick and which order in the warehouse do I need to go around. So if I go to bin AA01, I scan my bin, I can scan my stock item, and because it's serial traceable, I need to scan the serial number, and because that serial number is in that bin, Sage is happy. If I scanned it in that serial number in Sage's world exists in a different bin, it's not going to allow me to pick it. It's going to say it does exist in Sage, but not in that bin. Or if it's a serial number which has never existed in Sage or it did exist, but it's been dispatched by somebody else, again, you're going to get those messages. There is an alternate. So some customers want to assign the serial or batch number on allocation. Again, we mirror Sage's approach. In that scenario, I have to pick the exact serial or batch that has been assigned. But if I click on that icon there, that's picked. You'll see that that disappears from the list, and that's because it's live. And if I come into my order, it tells me there's some items that have been picked but not yet packed. So it tells the user. At the top, it tells me the order is currently being picked by Steve. And we've also tweaked Sage, so we've added this pick column. So again, Agriline have built their own dashboards. But again, I know Richard and the team at EBS do a lot from a reporting perspective. But they've built a dashboard in the corner. They can see how many items to pick and dispatch today, how many have been picked, how many have been dispatched, or from just the relevant fields in the database. So let's go around and pick the other items. And by it being live, if perhaps it's a 200 line order, you can have two people picking, one starts at the bottom, one starts at the top, and they meet somewhere, hopefully in the middle, if they're picking at the same speed. Now, the other thing is, in my opinion, if it's set up correctly, I should be able to, albeit very slowly, come into the warehouse and pick the right items. Now, you know, obviously there was a lot about PPE gloves and, you know, kind of all those things. Well, you know, gloves where they're small, medium and large, the boxes look identical unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So it does mean that if I scan, no, that's not the right item. No, that's not the right item. Okay, perfect, that's the right. So again, in terms of the accuracy and making sure that you're picking and packing the right items for your customers, again, this can be a good utility for them. I'm going to pick that. I'm going to pick 150 of those. I could have told the system how many boxes, so I could put them into boxes, numerous boxes, and which boxes am I putting them into. The pack stage is this option here. I can pack those into different boxes, pallets, there's different options there. But I'm just going to, I can print a packing list. So you might have a team of pickers and a team of packers. So I leave that for the packers. I can pack all the items. So I can say that they've been packed. You don't have to have a packing stage if you don't want to. And then I can dispatch them as well. So if I come now to dispatch, at this stage you can force the user to rescan them. So that might be another option. Or alternatively, I can just dispatch the packed items. Now what this is doing, I might get an error message. It depends if our print server's up and running on the demo environment. No, it is. That's always a good thing. So a couple of things have happened. Firstly, have a look at the top here. Refresh. That's now dispatched fully the order. So that's ready for finance to invoice. And if I look in my printer, there's my dispatch note. And if I just zoom in, we can see there with the serial number, and you can tell the system how many do you want to go through. So again, it's updating Sage from the warehouse itself. Now, a couple of other options on that, and then I'll kind of pause, hand back over to Ben to see, just to close and see if there's any questions. That's great. So I go off, pick one order, come back, go and pick another order, come back and give it to the packing bench if that's how we're set up. But if they're going to be similar items, that might not be the most efficient way. So what you can do is you can also utilize a wave pick. So a wave pick is where you pick multiple sales orders at the same time. And that's where, to create a wave, you click on the plus, auto-generate a number, and then you tell it what sales orders in that wave. So if you are printing the pick list with the barcode on, the supervisor can go, okay, we're going to create a wave, we'll pick those 10 sales orders. The person scans all 10 of them, the barcodes, creates a wave, and then asks me to come and pick wave number 2. And what I get is just a list of all of the stock items for those 10 sales orders. Now, it does tell me which sales orders we need them for, but essentially, rather than keep going backwards, I go and pick for all of those 10 orders, put it into this area, and then I can pack for all of them. We've also got a feature which we've been working with a business partner on for a customer around totes as well. So this particular client's got these big wheelie bins, for want of another phrase, and you set up those totes so they're unique barcodes. And as you do a wave pick, you just tell it which tote. You put them into the various different totes. They go around this conveyor belt to the packing bench. They just scan the tote. It tells them what sales order it is and what items are in the tote, and they pack and then dispatch that. So again, we've got different features that we've been working with others. So just to streamline that process. So hopefully that gives you a flavour for what we're doing. It's an Android-based device, so it's using modern technology from an app, but it is updating Sage real time and utilising Sage features. So really appreciate your time. I'm going to hand back over to Ben just to kind of put all that back into the context of the objectives for today's session, but also see if there's been any questions as well. Ben.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks everyone for your time. I know it's difficult to, especially for myself, to sit down for 45 minutes talking about kind of business software, but I think from our perspective, and obviously working with the guys at EBS, we wanted to make sure you get some kind of value from this. So hopefully there's some key takeaways that you'll be able to think about. I know we covered a lot, so I wanted to open up the floor to see if anyone's got any questions.
Now, I never know at this stage whether I've done a fantastic job, so I've covered all of the questions, or whether I've just bored the pants off everybody for the last 45 minutes and they're thinking, why did I sign on to this thing? Now, often what happens is you'll be having your lunch and you'll think, oh, should have asked that question, or actually you've probably got a lot of questions, but you think it might be better doing that on a one-to-one. So, if you have got any questions, happy, as Ben said, open it to the floor, but if not, feel free to send those through to Darren and Richard, or even, as I said, happy to do a one-to-one and just talk through this individually. Perfect.
Brilliant stuff. I was going to say last chance to get your question in now, but
I'm 6 foot. That's probably one of the questions. So I'll just to cover that one.
It's cameras on, Steve.
Okay, 5'11.5", but no.
Ben,
have you got anything to add, or?
No, I think probably the main thing is that, again, as Steve was mentioning, that you probably have your lunch and maybe you have a few questions. So so Darren's actually going to follow up with recordings and give you the opportunity to actually ask any of those questions. Steve and I are always here. I know it was very much a high level overview, but we're always here to answer any questions that you have and perhaps go into a little bit of a deeper dive. But yeah, again, thanks everyone for your time.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you. Well, once again from EBS as well. Thanks everybody for attending. Questions directed at myself or Darren. Yeah, appreciate Steve and Ben you running the session today. I think it's been really useful. And yeah, we'll try and run some more webinars over the next few weeks, and we'll send those invites out as well.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, stay safe.
Thanks all.
Lovely afternoon. Thanks all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.